Welcome to the 5th lecture in Module 6. And in this lecture we'll talk about dynamic HTML content creation using templates and layouts in Rails. Now, the controller and view in the model view controller design pattern are very tightly coupled. So recall that the controllers supply data to the view, and that controller actions are very commonly the targets of the links that you find in your Rails views. Now in Rails, a controller makes every single instance variable that it creates available to its associated view file. In other words, think back. All of the posts are retrieved as a part of the post controller index method, and they're stored in this @post array. Then when you move over to the app views index.html file, that same posts variable is available to the view. So here we see it on the very first line, @post.each. That's an iterator. Notice that there's an angle bracket, a %sign, and then a close angle bracket under a %sign. That's embedded Ruby. Then you see some HTML, and then on the next two lines, there's some tags and some additional embedded Ruby, and then you see the end statement at the very bottom that goes with this iterator. Now notice the embedded Ruby associated with the TD elements here. There's an equal sign there, but the one above doesn't have an equal sign and the end doesn't have an equal sign. We'll see why in just a moment. So in Rails, dynamic content is generated using templates, and the most common templating system is this embedded Ruby that I just showed you. So sometimes we use the term ERB to refer to embedded Ruby. ERB is just a filter. It takes an HTML.ERB template file as input, and it transforms it into pure HTML as output. And here's how that works. Normal HTML content is just passed through without being changed. Any content between the angle bracket and a %equal sign is interpreted as Ruby code, it's executed, and then whatever value is returned is actually substituted into the HTML. If this equal sign is left off, the code is executed, but nothing is inserted into the HTML. So this is how ERB works. Although ERB allows you to insert code into Ruby code into an HTML file, use it sparingly. Your application logic should not be in your view. I've already talked to you, warned you about this. So in a RESTful architecture, the HTML code should specify the structure of the document, and the Ruby code is used to provide just dynamic things that are retrieved from the database, for example. So the actual resources are specified using ERB. That's what we just saw with the posts. So you'll read the post dynamically, and then they'll show up in the web page. Again, application level functionality, business logic should never, ever be found in ERB templates. Now, for generating HTML elements and formatting data in the view, there are a number of Rails helper methods that you can use, and I encourage you to use them. They really significantly make your view code much simpler to maintain and use. We'll see a few of these in just a moment. Now, in order to generate the final HTML file that's going to be sent to the browser, a layout file is invoked. And this ERB template is passed to that file as a block. And by default, the layout that is used is a common layout used across the entire application. And it's found under App Views, Layouts, Application.html.erb. And this file is automatically created whenever you create a Rails application. Now, what's the advantage of layouts? Well, by putting all of this common information in one file, you can change that one file and the entire website, every single page on that website changes accordingly. This is a very good software engineering practice. If you want to have different layouts for different parts of your site, you can create specific layouts for those specific parts of your site. And the way you do that is you name the layout the same name as your controller that you want to associate it with, and you place it in that same layouts folder that application.html.erb is found in. So as an example, if you wanted to create a layout for your posts, you would call it posts.html.erb, and here's where you would put it. Let's take a look at the application.html.erb file. Remember I said that the embedded Ruby file is sent to this as a block, and you'll see that there's a yield statement right here. Well, that yield statement is where your block is placed. So notice that this is well-formed HTML. There's a doc type up here, then there's HTML, the head, and the body. And in the body, this is where your code is placed. So the index.html.erb is processed and substituted right there where the yield statement is. So here's how the HTML file is created in response to an HTTP GET request for posts. So recall that the controller first grabs these posts from the database and places them in this @post instance variable. And index.html.erb is placed inside the application.html.erb file. This yield statement is executed, which causes this index.html.erb code to be placed there. This is run through the filter that executes all of the ERB. An index.html file is created and sent to the client tier, in other words, to the browser. Now, there are numerous helper methods that are intended to help you better use ERB templates. We saw a few of them in the application.html.erb file. For example, this style sheet link tag is a helper method that's HTML uses to generate links in the header. The JavaScript include tag is used to create a link to a JavaScript file. And then the CRSF meta tag is included to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. Let's take a look at some of the helper methods that are available to you in Rails, in particular the ones that you can use in your views. And here I've gone to the Ruby API, so go to api.rubyonrails.org/classes/action-view/helpers.html. Or just do a Google search on Rails Guide Action View, and this should come up as one of the first items. And let's take a look at some of these. Here's the form helper. We already saw a bunch of these in the previous lecture. Let's take a look at these. And you'll see there's a good description here about form helpers. They're designed to make working with resources much easier compared to working with plain vanilla HTML. And we saw this form for in the previous lecture, the label, text field, and so forth, and as well as this submit button. So this is something we saw in the previous lecture. And what's nice here, it shows you the HTML that it generates, that Ruby code generates. And there's a bunch of additional information here. And here you've got all the various methods that are available to you. And so we've seen label, we've seen a number of these things. So I encourage you to read through this and understand how these various helper methods will work for you. Let's take a look at a few others. We also have, if we go back to the list of available helpers in the views, we also have a URL helper that's very handy. So if you look at this URL helper, you'll see there's a button to, again, it says it provides a set of methods for making links and getting URLs that depend on the routing subsystem easier. So this allows you to create URLs. The link to is quite common. Let me click on it. This one, you just, it shows how to use it here. So link to, and if you provide a particular, something like PostPass, it'll actually generate the link for you in your view. This completes the 5th lecture in Module 6.